Hello fellow cinephiles, 90s Film Guru here. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'll be reviewing The Game. This came out in 1997, was directed by David Fincher and written by John Brancato, Michael Farris. It starred Michael Douglas, Sean Penn, Deborah Kara Unger and a variety of others. The film follows the story of Nick Van Oren, played by Michael Douglas, a rich investment banker who dreads his birthday coming up as he's the same age as his father was when he died. He lives a secluded life, he doesn't really have a lot of interactions with others, and he feels safe in his little controlled world. Everything changes when he's gifted with a particular gift certificate by his brother, Conrad, played by Sean Penn. The gift certificate is for a particular game. This is a real interactive game that is about giving the particular person a certain experience. He doesn't know when it's going to begin, but when it does finally begin, he starts to question what's real and what's not. Is certain things happening part of the game? Is the people behind the game sort of sinister people trying to manipulate people and steal their money or hurt them in some way? And it really becomes this cat and mouse thing about him trying to work out what's going on before it's too late. This is a film that Fincher did in between Seven and Fight Club. And I think that's kind of interesting because it is a bit different from those two. Those two are his most known and most popular films. Obviously there's some others later in his career, but in his early stages they were the two films that everybody looked at and talked about and still talk about today. But it did have similarities between those other two films in that each of them take place in a city that's sort of dark and gritty at night, and it's each about a journey that each of the characters go on, whether it's mentally, physically or emotionally. And it all combines, and you can see this you can put these together in a sort of a trilogy of sorts that all take place in a particular city at night, and there's a lot of dark and twisted things that unfold, and the characters end up in something they didn't quite expect. From a video I saw, I think they were going to do a Godzilla film in the 90s before the one we got Roland Emmerich did, and I'm pretty sure Fincher was one of the directors attached to that and really wanted to do it. But when it fell through and he had enough of waiting, he decided to go and make The Game. And this is the film that we got. The Game was well received by critics. Even Roger Ebert really liked it. So that says a lot to me because Ebert's one of those great film reviewers. So originally Jonathan Mostow was set to direct this film. Kyle MacLachlan and Bridget Fonda cast in the roles. That would have been kind of interesting. Kyle MacLachlan, he could have done it. I just don't think he would have done what Michael Douglas did. But ultimately Mostow dropped out and ultimately Fincher picked it up and he ran with it. It really has his particular style and feel about it. Like I mentioned with those other two films, it's dark and gritty at times. There's a mysteriousness to it. He really knows how to shoot at night. He knows how to light it and make it look really cool and allow us to still see things, which a lot of films don't these days. It's an artistic choice, they say, by showing us something we can't really see in the dark because it's artistic. Fincher really knows how to handle these particular sequences, and he really knows how to make them look the most effective. Oh, and Fincher actually brought in another writer, Andrew Kevin Walker, that worked with him on Seven, and sort of punched the script up and made it into something a bit more than what we originally were going to get, which I really love. When these two work together is fantastic, and Fincher worked with him again recently. There's just something really cool about these two people collaborating and crafting really interesting films. It's interesting, Fincher had three influences for the film. He wanted Michael Douglas to be kind of a fashionable, good-looking Scrooge with a Mission Impossible-esque story and with a steroid shot in the thigh of the Sting. So those three films he thought of when making this, which makes sense because Nick is a kind of a Scrooge-ish character, and it is this sort of unbelievable thing he gets mixed up in where he doesn't know whether it's true or not, like they do in Mission Impossible. But it also has that sort of sting where the tables are turned more and more as the film goes along. Apparently the purpose of The Game, your greatest fear, put it in your face and say, look, you're still alive. That's really what the film, to me, is kind of about. It's about this guy has control over everything, and then he's thrown into something he has no control over. And he really gets to see what he's capable of, and we get to see what he's capable of. And I kind of like that aspect of the movie. that's really about shaking this man's life up, who's contained, controlled, and just throwing it into chaos and seeing how he handles what's going on. It's difficult for the Nick character because everyone's telling him different things. He doesn't know what the truth is, and he doesn't really know what's going on. So there's a lot of elements to it that are really about shaking someone's life up. Apparently, even though he did the game in between Seven and Fight Club, it was the first film he actually wanted to do. But because Brad Pitt became available, he decided to do Seven, so then that shifted this film into the next film he would make, which I think worked better in his favour in a lot of ways because Seven was better received than, and a much more grittier story than what we got in the game, and it might have been interesting if he had made the game first, maybe he wouldn't have made Seven. So I think it kind of all worked out. And apparently originally for the Deborah Kara Unger character, Jodie Foster, but Fincher wasn't sure about that because she was a much younger sort of actress at the time, and whether that would work with Michael Douglas, and was going to make her his daughter, but then obviously things changed. Other reason it didn't happen with Jodie Foster is because there was conflicting schedules with Zemeckis' Contact, which is an amazing film, and I'm glad she kind of went on to make that, and Deborah Kara Unger was cast in this, and she's really great. I think Michael Douglas is fantastic in this film. It's definitely one of his better roles. Like he's sort of withdrawn and he perfectly captures this particular character. And he's believable when weird things start to happen because he is this sort of rich, powerful guy who's in control. And then when all these things start to happen, it's realistic, his reaction to it. Some things are kind of a little bit extreme, but most of the time it is kind of how someone like him would react to the situations he finds himself in. I think Sean Penn's really good in it. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, but when he's on screen, you pay attention. It was sort of back when he was in his midst of his height of his acting. And I really love him and Michael Douglas. And he has a really cool scene towards the end where he gets a bit chaotic and crazy and fearful, and I really like what he does in the film. And I think Deborah Kara Unger is fantastic in this movie. She's really the character that's first starts to help Nick out, but she's not quite what she seems, and then all these things start to unfold and you think they're against her and him, and then she gets all swept up in it. But I think she's fantastic, and I really like the chemistry between her and Michael Douglas, and just the way the characters are around each other, and how by the end of the film there's a connection and a bond between them, and also like Nick has finally been able to let go and be free of the constraints of the things he's created to control his life. There's a lot of aspects to this film I really love. I think it's an interesting look at this particular guy to begin with, but I think ultimately when the game begins is when the film really picks up, when you really become invested in it. Because you're not quite sure what's going on. You're not sure if it really is a game or if they're just there to rob him. You don't quite know. And certain things unfold as you go along. Like there's a scene where he returns back to his house and it's being graffitied and there's flashing lights and it's all these sort of things. And it's sort of saying that like these guys might be dangerous. There's also another scene earlier in the film where he returns home and he finds this clown, this clown on the ground, in the same way that his father was when he committed suicide. And he takes it inside and there's a key that he finds, and then someone on the TV talks to him. So there's all these sort of really interesting aspects to it where it starts to play with his mind, whether he's really seeing and experiencing these things or if it's all in his head. There's some cool set pieces and sequences in it, where he's trapped in a cab that crashes into the water and how he gets out of that. There's little bits and pieces dropped throughout it where he receives particular packages and certain things that he uses to help him as the game continues. There's also this cool sequence where a character seems to be hurt and they call an ambulance and they go in the ambulance and ultimately end up this place, and then suddenly all the lights go out and everybody walks away, and it's all part of the game. So it really starts to play with the audience's mind too. You're not quite sure what's real and what's not. It's beautifully shot, day and night. I like the mystery element to it. I like how creepy and twisted it sort of becomes. I like the performances. There's just something really cool about this film. There's something that sort of slowly draws you in. It's a little different from the other earlier films that Fincher did make. And it's sort of a bit more in vain in the films he later would make. Sort of where he's shifting away from more of the horror sci-fi aspect and moving into something that's just a simple story. This story existed before he came on board, but he shaped it and turned it into what it became. And that was due to his collaboration with the writer, and just really the way he directs really suited this material. It might not be his strongest film in his catalogue, but it is definitely a solid movie. And it's a long way from Alien 3 and less trouble, it seemed, he had on that. He had much more control. And I think that was due to his getting through Alien 3, but also because of his success with 7. It kind of allowed him a bit more freedom than I think he would have had not done 7 before it. So the budget on this film was like 70 million, went on to make 109 million. So it was quite successful and did really well. But it is one of those Fincher films not a lot of people talk about who are fans of his movies. Tend to either talk about how the struggles and how he struggled with Alien 3 or 7 or Fight Club or Zodiac or any of those other movies he made later in his career. But The Game's one that sort of slips by. No one really talks about it. I don't really see any videos about it. It just kind of is a film that kind of disappeared. But I think people should revisit this film. I think there's a lot in it. I think it's a really, really solid movie that's really wonderfully directed. I like the writing of the script. I think all the performances are really great. And like the character, Nick, it's really about us trying to work out what's going on as he does. So it makes us a participant in the film rather than just a simple observer. And I really like when movies do that. It feels like I can invest a lot more into them because of that than if it was just me observing what's going on. And obviously the third act and the ending are really great, where he sort of ends up in Christine, which is Kara Unger's house, and he starts to ask her questions, and then slowly she goes out of the room to get dressed, and then we start to slowly see that this whole unit, this whole room is a setup. Nothing's real. These tags on lights, the books aren't real, they're just sort of fabricated things. And he starts to question what's really going on. And this is this whole sequence where they shoot machine guns at the house, and you think like, wow, this is quite extreme for a game. And later on she says, well, they're blanks, but it's like, but how did they get all the holes? Anyway, it's a whole different story. From that point to the end is where it really picks up, where he ends up unconscious, he ends up in Mexico, he doesn't have anything, he has to find his way back. And then he starts to piece things together, and he starts to go at the people he feels are responsible for the game and doing this to him. And it's about how he does that. And there's a really great end sequence on a rooftop that's really cool. And it starts to question what's real and what's not. And even like when they sort of twist it to say, maybe it's not what you think, then they twist it again. And I like that. Keeps you guessing till the very end. Like I mentioned, I think this is one of Fincher's underrated movies, and I really, really like it. And it's a film I think people should look at. Final thoughts. In the end, this is a movie that shows the skill of a really great thriller director, or a great director in general, David Fincher, what he was capable of, and how he did something a bit different in between 7 and Fight Club. That's well put together, great acting, has a wonderful vibe, and is beautifully shot. This is definitely one of my more favourite 90s movies to come out in this decade. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom, follow me on Facebook and Letterboxd. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.